G'day everyone and welcome to Seven Questions, a podcast that shares the stories and compelling lessons founders, investors and leaders shaping our economy. I'm your host, Gerard, founder and investor at Partner and co-founder of Create Financial. Through Seven Questions, we explore the founder journey, idea to legacy, uncovering the insights, lessons and defining moments that shaped each founder and the amazing business they built. Whether you're a first-time founder, serial entrepreneur, investor, or someone looking for insights on entrepreneurship and what it takes to build a world-class company, these conversations are designed to inspire you, get you thinking, and hopefully you'll find some timely wisdom that propels your journey. 1 in 5 new mums suffer from postpartum depression. That's staggering. To date, the only assessment available is literally a written checklist that you go through if you feel like you're suffering from the symptoms of postpartum depression. Enter the room Clarissa Yates, the CEO and founder of Ketim Technologies. Clarissa, who was an academic studying, had a baby and suffered postpartum depression and decided to do something about it. Ketim Technologies was born. Today, Ketim Technologies is at a stage where they're getting ready to undertake clinical trials. They've already identified the unique biomarkers with 94% accuracy of helping a mum to identify if they are likely to suffer from postpartum depression. A mum takes a blood test at the end of the second trimester. That blood panel is then screened, and if they're likely to suffer from postpartum, their doctor is notified. And so then they can be proactive and do something about it. This is a super compelling problem to solve. And it's going to be a great conversation to hear from Clarissa about how she's solving it, the journey she's been on, the lessons she's learning, and the stage that Ketim Technologies is at. So I hope you enjoy this episode of 7 Questions with Clarissa Yates, the CEO and co-founder of Ketim Technologies. G'day everyone, welcome to 7 Questions. I am super excited to have Clarissa Yates, CEO and co-founder of Ketim, on the podcast with me. I've got to know Clarissa over the last couple of months. She is a powerhouse founder, has a PhD in deep medical tech and is applying it to what I think is one of the most pertinent and relevant problems in our society today, which is postpartum depression and a bunch of other really exciting things that you're going to hear about from Clarissa. So Clarissa, I am excited to have you on 7 Questions podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Wayne. Yes, it's really good to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to get into this and just be able to just talk everything about what we've been doing and how we can progress from here as well.
Fantastic. So before we start with 7 questions, let's start by helping the audience get to know you. So who are you and what moments or experience shaped your founder journey?
Yeah, so I'm a neuroscientist by training, so that's what my PhD is in. I've been very interested in mental health for a very long time, just from my own family's history and my own experience as well. When I was diagnosed with postpartum depression after I gave birth to my children, that really spurred me to want to understand the deep biology of depression. And that's, what spurred me to go on to do my PhD. And really, from that moment, I realized very, very soon that I didn't want to stay in academia. I really wanted to be able to translate and to have clinical practice as well as have impact. And so, it went from my PhD and essentially I went straight into a startup and, opened Ketim, launched Ketim in 2024, essentially a year after my PhD.
Clarissa, you are rare when it comes to researchers who really consciously from the beginning have it in their mind to take the research they're doing and then apply it, translate it and apply it. So what was the inspiration or the leverage, the mindset shift, or why did you think that you could be a researcher and then just go straight into being a founder?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of funny now when you look back because, back then and even still today, there's a bit of this two camps. You either become an academic and you go for the tenured position where you do your traditional bachelor's, PhD, postdoc, and then you hope to get that professorship at some point. And it almost has this kind of like black mark if you say that you're moving to industry, and they kind of see you as
Yeah.
a traitor of science, right? They're like, oh, you're not a purist. And so there was a lot of supervisors and people at the time that would be like, oh, I don't go into industry. They're all about money and it's not about helping. And I found that to be untrue, obviously. I think
Of
for
course.
me, it's like I didn't want to just spend my whole life, writing papers and, publishing it for the sake of getting recognition for my work. I didn't really care if I had any sort of recognition. I just really wanted to help patients. And the way to do that was to make something that could be translated into the clinic. And a lot of the times in research, we're not able to do that. I mean, the innovation gap in Australia is just shocking, right? It's like we just don't have the capabilities or the ability to move from research to clinical practice and to innovation.
It's interesting, Clarissa, because I actually think we have the capability. We have the infrastructure, we have the startup ecosystem, we have the mentors, we have the programs, the accelerators, and we even have the investors. What I
Yeah,
actually think is we have a lack of, it's almost like an attitude inside
yes,
research organizations where, as you described, the preference is for people to do research as opposed to take their research and apply it to create solutions to real problems and add real value. And so it is super great to see you, I guess, bucking that trend and literally being an example of actually how successful a researcher can be when they decide to make the step from academia or research and translate into real products and services. So let's talk about Ketim. What is the inspiration for the business? What is the problem you're solving, and how are you solving it?
yeah. So, when I was doing my PhD, I realized very quickly as well that neuroscience in itself, or let's look at, psychiatric disorders as a whole. There's a saying in research that, when you look at psychiatric disorders, we call it the graveyard disease, meaning, it's been over like, 50 years since we've seen any new sort of technology or anything that has been different from what we understand today, using classical sort of antidepressants to treat mental disorders, for example. And, from, this 50 years ago, what I call the ancient times, we were still using questionnaires and surveys, right? That, I mean, we live in a society today where, you have, you can use blood samples, you can use saliva, you can use your gut, your stool samples, microbiome, all of that. And we're still relying on screening sort of self-reporting questionnaires for psychiatric disorders, which to me was just shocking. So when I went through
Yeah.
my own experience of postpartum depression, I was like, there's no way these 10 questions can actually, give me this assurance that a clinician can make a decision based upon these questions. So I wanted to use my background in, molecular biology, trying to understand, I guess the signaling pathways in your body, in your cells, in your blood. How can this actually relate to what we're feeling? Not necessarily the questionnaires, but can we at least predict some of these symptoms before it occurs? Because you can see that when you have questionnaires, you already have the symptoms, right? You're already trying to express
Yeah,
what your
sure.
symptoms are. So if you don't have the symptoms and if you can predict something before it occurs, wouldn't that be amazing? So that was really that aha moment for me. How can we form a way to predict some of these disorders or some of these symptoms before they occur and be able to get that early help when they need it?
So in essence, you're basically saying that you're taking your understanding of neuroscience and molecular biology and looking for biomarkers that reflect the, I guess, the condition or the disease that that is postpartum depression,
Exactly.
and helping people to have an actual scientific assessment of it as
Yes.
opposed to a subjective, questionnaire based assessment.
Exactly. And I think the main thing here is that stigma that's associated with, mental disorders. So the problem I guess I see with questionnaires today, other than the fact that it's self-reported and it's really subjective, is that the onus is on the person to essentially go to a clinician and say, I'm feeling X, Y, and Z, and then have that, I suppose, the insight in themselves to say, I need help, which is very hard. There's a lot of stigma around that, right? So, for someone to even admit that they want to see a doctor for something, to do with their mental health, it's a big step on its own. Whereas if you have biological sort of proteins or markers in your blood or anywhere in your bodily fluids that indicates it's actually something that's going on with your biology. It's nothing to do with your mental, power of, oh, I should just get over this. Then it removes that stigma, and immediately it helps the person to understand, okay, this is not just about me feeling weak or being weak. I actually have a biological underlying problem that, we see in all kinds of diseases, right? So why can't we treat mental health as just health? It doesn't have to have the mental in front of it, right? It's just health. Like, your what you do with your normal health, mental health is just part of your health.
So if you have biological markers that indicate that you're suffering from something, that is no different to any other health condition that a person has. And you're right, removing the stigma of mental health and making it about, hey, we want to help you get healthy. We've identified biomarkers and we can do something about those. It really does empower clinicians to be proactive rather than waiting for a patient to come in and go, hey, I've got an issue. I don't know what it is. I need some help. Yeah, really powerful.
Exactly.
Question number 2, Clarissa, is what unique insight or secret sauce or different approach are you taking with Ketim to solve the problem of postpartum depression?
Yeah, so, what we're doing differently at Ketim is that, there's a lot of companies that are looking at biomarkers. There's companies looking at EEG markers, for example, brain recording, sleep, patterns in their wearables and things like that. But I think one of the things that we're doing very differently here is that we're using a combination of the biology. We're also including a lot of the psychosocial risk factors, right? So, for example, we know that in postpartum depression, you have a higher risk of developing it if you come from a lower socioeconomic background or you come from, you're culturally diverse. So these are things that affect a woman's, susceptibility to postpartum. We're including that in our analysis as well, and we're doing this by using algorithms, right? Predictive algorithms that combine our biological signals as well as, all the other environmental factors that can, impede on these biological markers. So when you put them together, that gives you a very clear and big picture of what's actually happening in a very holistic way. I think that's something we're doing differently. There's a lot of biomarker companies out there that are just relying on the signals, but they're not really considering all the different environmental factors that can also impart on that illness.
That sounds to me like a really thoughtful solution set that could actually be applied to a whole bunch of different health conditions. So are you looking at other health conditions beyond just postpartum depression?
Yes, so we're starting with postpartum depression only because, in a way, based on my own personal experience, but I guess it's also one of those conditions where you can, find very standardized time points, right? When a mother's coming in to do her blood draws, pregnancy is gestation period is the same for most women. So in a way, you can almost standardize that process. And I think this is one of the gaps in going from research to, clinical translation is that there's always going to be a big gap between what you find in research and it's cool and it's novel and it's interesting. But once you start going to clinical, everything has to be very regulatory, defined. So for us, starting with postpartum as a platform, or as a way to, project what we're doing, and if we can show that its efficacy is good in this area, yes, we can start looking at other neurological conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia and other depressive disorders as well. So yeah, there's a huge potential for us to essentially go from postpartum and maximize what we can do here and then go on to other conditions.
It's a really exciting trajectory for Ketim and something that I think makes a lot of sense as you start the business, you land in an area that you can really well define, complete your clinical trials in, have meet all the regulatory requirements, and then from there expand across other neuro conditions. I've got a question that relates to the experience of let's call them a patient, but they're also a customer, right?
Yeah.
So, mother to be is going, very standard set of like a timeline of approaches. How do you participate? How do you interact with the mother? You mentioned earlier that there's a standard blood draw at a certain time during the pregnancy. Is that the first interaction, and how does that all work?
Yeah, so this is really something that we did from our market research. And in a way, when we first decided to come up with a blood test, I think one of the things that really shaped Ketim and what our strategy was going to be is that we weren't really interested in diagnosis or diagnostic, I guess, biomarkers. We didn't want to do something that could be done after the mother had already is experiencing those symptoms. So we wanted to look back at her blood time points early in pregnancy, and could we use these blood time points as a window to, which mother is going to be at risk of developing postpartum depression. And so we essentially looked at time points that we knew would be in line with the current clinical care. So, when you're pregnant, you come in at your first your first checkup, I suppose, which is roughly around that, between 8 to 12 weeks gestation. You're confirming the pregnancy, you're making sure that everything's okay. And then the next time point that they come in is roughly around that 24-week time point where they're looking at their second trimester screening. They're taking bloods already for their gestational diabetes screening. So for us, it's like, okay, if we can look at that time point and draw an extra blood, vial when they're already going to be coming in, we're not going to change the way clinical practice is done. We're not going to
Yep.
have any more additional effort on the clinicians, which is very important. As we all know, adoption is really critical. And we're not also going to put any more, effort on the mothers to have to come in a separate time. So for us, our initial pilot study was done on that 24-week time point, and that's where we discovered our novel protein panel that could predict mothers' risk of depression with a 94% accuracy.
That sounds like a pretty compelling result, 94% accuracy in a proactive stage of a woman's pregnancy. So the ability to predict that they're likely to be susceptible to postpartum depression. What do you do with that data?
So at that point, usually what happens is that the woman goes through a whole bunch of blood tests, similar to what ours would be. The results would then be, I guess the blood test would be done at a standard pathology place if they have the markers for that. For us, because ours is proprietary and we're still working out how we're going to actually get these markers tested in pathology, most likely the blood samples will come to us. We'll do our own sort of testing in our specific device. And then what happens is that the data for us would go into a cloud, into a simple cloud that we put our algorithm and we deploy our algorithm there. And so the results will come as a clinical risk report, and the clinicians can then, combining that with all the other data they get from the other blood tests that they're doing, can have a full picture again of what's actually happening at that time point. So once the clinician has that, they can make the call. Should we refer this mother to, a social support group? Should we refer this mother to a psychologist right now? Should we start that intervention right now where we, give them possibly antidepressants because the benefits will outweigh the risks? So these are questions that clinicians need to know. And in fact, when we did our market research, in the US, in EU, as well as in Australia, it was very clear to us that the clinicians were very happy that it's a predictive test that they can do something about and have that intervention rather than it being a diagnostic test. So for us, we were in the right track, and we knew that we were developing something that the clinicians actually wanted as well.
It sounds like a really valuable solution to help potential mums understand where they're at, and then to take the right preventative or proactive actions to mitigate the risk, or at least manage the risk.
Yes.
If it's prevalent. What
Yes.
percentage of mums to be likely to suffer with postpartum depression?
So worldwide, 1 in 5. So that's a very
20%.
known statistics. Yeah, 20%. And the scary thing is that out of that 1 in 5 of mothers that do suffer from postpartum, or at least would be diagnosed eventually, up to 75-80% of them would never get treated or actually diagnosed, just because of the way the current system is. They get missed from the questionnaires. They have to, the onus is on them to go to clinician, all of that. So you can imagine that when a mother gives birth, essentially she's kicked out of the hospital as soon as possible. And so when she experiences her symptoms post-birth, there's no like, there's nowhere for her to go, right?
There's no support network or anything, right?
No, there's nothing. She would have to find somehow the way to bring her newborn baby while she's sleep deprived to a clinician and say something's wrong. Most of the time, clinicians are like, "Oh, it's just hormonal. It's okay. You'll be fine in a few days. Just it's all right," which is my experience. And then essentially, you know that something's up, and then the clinicians say, "No, it's fine. It's just hormonal. You'll be fine." And so you just keep playing this, cat and mouse chasing game until something serious happens. And in that, percentage of mothers that do suffer, some of them go on to develop something known as postpartum psychosis, right, where they essentially have thoughts of, something harming themselves or the baby, and that's a really serious disorder, debilitating. And some of these mothers actually end up in the emergency department. So, is there a way to prevent that, right? It's a preventable maternal death that we can actually prevent, because in Queensland, the statistics show that, like the top reason for maternity death in the postpartum period is actually attributed to suicide. And that's something that most people don't know.
Yeah, so this sounds like a really preventable situation, at least a really manageable situation. And an assessment like the assessment you're providing really illuminates very clearly the risk factors and allows people to be proactive rather than reactive. I literally could not imagine any potential mum to be not wanting to know if they were at risk.
That's right. And the interesting thing is that when we started Ketim and started, like, I guess, interviewing the consumers and I guess the clients, or I guess what you call like the customers, most of them were the partners that actually came to us and said that, if there was something I could do, I would have, even if my wife didn't want to do it, I would ask her to do it because I want to know so that I can help her and I can be aware of what's going on. So, it's the partners that's driving this, which is, to me, was like, I didn't expect that. But then you think about it and yeah, that makes sense, right? Because if the mother's experiencing what she's experiencing, her main focus would be on the baby. She's most likely not thinking of herself. But the partner is like, okay, I'm looking at my wife and she's not doing well. I need to help her. I need to do something. And so we get this huge drive from partners. And this is something that is really well known in the literature, that dads can also suffer from postpartum depression. It's actually 1 in 10 dads can also experience the same symptoms. And, we have dads that suffer from PTSD, like 10, 20 years later. They're still thinking about, oh, if my wife had this test 10, 20 years ago, I would have done it. So we're having, partners that are experiencing this, and then 10, 20 years later, it's still very raw, and they're still thinking about, I'm glad that someone's doing something about this, because now I can help my daughter, now I can help my granddaughter. So that's what we're seeing.
As a husband and a father, I would have loved to have access to a test like this to have helped, to have known if my wife was susceptible and to have helped, right? Because you go through that period of childbirth with them and all you want to do is help. So yes. I can absolutely understand why it makes sense for the partners to have a genuine interest in this. Let's shift gears a little bit and help everyone get to know you a bit as the founder of Ketim. So what is one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you started this journey of being a founder and a CEO?
So I think one of the things that I wish I'd known then was it's a big jump. I think that's obvious, but I think having an idea and being passionate about your idea is one thing. And then being able to then, have that idea go into the next step, which is, how can we start actually developing a product from your idea, is a very big next step. So I think a lot of us start out at that beginning step where we're like, we got a solid idea, we're very passionate, we know it's going to change the world, yada, yada. But then they really underestimate that having a good idea is not necessarily the only thing that you need to know. You also need to know if it's got market potential. You need to know if customers actually want it. You need to know if the product's going to be adopted, especially if you're thinking about a clinical product or a health product. Then you have to think about the regulatory. So there's so many facets, I guess, of trying to translate an idea to something that can be adopted or deployed. And I think one thing I've learned now is that, be kind to yourself, because I think when you go from idea and you want to change the world and you have people that believe in that and you believe in your idea, but be kind to yourself, because it will take time for you to wrap your head around all the different things that needs to happen. And I think at the beginning, it's very easy to sort of like compare yourself to others and go, oh, this person is already, raising this much money, and this person's already, going into this market, and this person has already X, Y, and Z. But it's going to take a while for you to get from idea to there. So, the journey has to be your own journey, and you have to own that journey.
When I think about the experience you've been on, and as a postgraduate researcher who's gone on to commercialize something, what's the infrastructure or what's the gap that you wish you had access to, the knowledge, the programs as a researcher that would have helped you move from idea into a business?
So, a lot of the universities, like you mentioned, do very good incubator sort of programs and sort of like research commercialization workshops. So when I was still within the university, I tried to attend as many as this type of, seminars and workshops as much as possible, because I think having even that knowledge was enough to give me that confidence to then move on to the next, to the next stage. But I think it's really, I think the lack of maybe, I guess, especially if you're in the health and medical field like myself, understanding the regulatory landscape is really critical. Understanding market research. I think you learn these things in business if you're in business school. But if you're in science and health and medical, where innovation is happening here with new drugs and there and biomarkers and devices and all of that, there's this gap between the scientific, evidence, but then there's also this gap between this business sort of evidence. So, I think if you are able to have that business knowledge, whether it's the basic sort of customer market research, who's your customer, who's your users, who's going to end up paying for it, who's the payer. And this, in our case, the payer isn't the customer, isn't the patients, it's actually the hospitals, and it's the clinicians. So if you're trying to sell to your clinicians and your hospitals, what do you have to do to gain their trust, right? Because it's very different to selling to consumers. And so you kind of have to have that knowledge. I think in science, in a PhD especially, if there was a little bit of a coursework, that said, if you want to commercialize, this is how you do it, that would be splendid. Because I think in the US, there's some, degree of that where, you can do, at Stanford or somewhere, or MIT, you're doing something that's really cool. But then there's also like, I guess coursework to help you understand that IP side, the regulatory side, the commercialization side. I think Australia can do a lot in that space.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the coursework or curriculum could include components of commercialization, of intellectual property, of customer and pricing and go-to-market, and really helping people with the entrepreneurial or business skills that complement their core discipline, their research skills, and the thematic they're interested in. Let's talk about pivotal moment. What's been something that's happened in your journey so far that has changed the trajectory of your company and changed the way you're thinking about going to market?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was really about getting experts and advisors very early on in the founder journey. I think, when you go from idea to wanting to start a company, it can feel very exciting, but it can also feel extremely like scary and intimidating, right? Because you're on your own. You almost feel like like you just don't have anyone who kind of understands what you're going through. But then I realized that having a community of people that understands that, they may not necessarily be in science or health or anything like that, but it's just having that support network and then having those advisors come on board early. And I think for me, that pivotal moment was really having my current chair of my board to come in. She's someone who's very well known in the biotech space and is well known for not taking on directorships very easily, I suppose. Yep. So when she believed in the idea enough and believed in me enough to come on as a director, it was a big shift. It was suddenly everyone in the biotech field was like, how did you manage to get her as a director? You have I guess we have confidence now in you because you managed to get her and we know who she is, etc. But then again, it's like I've been very fortunate because she's also been a great mentor to me. So, when you have good mentors helping you along the way, you have to be willing to, I guess, be open to changes as well, right? I think one of the things we have with scientists is that you're very sure of the science, and that's great, but that doesn't mean that it can be translated into a product. So you have to be willing to go, okay, this may not work in this particular, I guess, domain. How can we, still stay true to the science, but have it in a different way that can still be accepted and, and still be adopted? And that's a pivotal thing that I think founders have to make.
I think you've touched on the idea of founder being coachable and being
Yes.
open to input and advice. Ultimately, the founder needs to make the decision on the strategy and direction of the business, but surrounding yourself with great people is critical. I think back to my founder journey, and when we hit a particular milestone in our business and decided to go and create a board, we literally went looking for a diverse board. And so we wanted
Yes.
someone that was voice of the customer. We wanted someone that had raised capital, scaled a business globally and sold it. We wanted someone that had raised, started a business, scaled it globally, listed it on the stock exchange. And we wanted someone that could help us with all the fundamentals of, operating a business legally in a complex, for us, it was an enterprise domain. So you're right. Surrounding yourself with great people and being coachable and open is an incredibly important aspect of going from, an early stage founder to someone that's going to scale a successful global company. What's one of the hardest decisions or challenges that you faced as a founder?
So I think we all know that capital, raising capital is always going to be the hardest thing to do as a founder, right? But there's also the interesting thing, I guess, for me, or the biggest sort of like thing that I learned as well is that I think coming from a scientific, I guess, background, again, if you go back into, if you're looking at, health and tech, and let's just say you have a scientific sort of PhD background. A lot of investors go, oh, okay, usually we don't like scientific founders because they tend to be very much on the science and very much on this is, the cool thing about this particular technology or the cool thing about this particular protein. And they go way, way, way too far down into detail and they lose the investor's interest, like on the spot. And I had to learn very early on that, like, yes, the science is important, but there's this whole other side that you also have to be able to convince investors, right? There's market potential. What's the gap? Who's the user again? What's your serviceable market? And how do you see a return on investment? And I think it's very tricky, fine balance, because you have to be able to be confident about your science because it is a scientific product that you're building, and you have to have rigor and evidence around it. But how can you also ensure that your investors who may not understand the science, but understand that there's potential here? And so for me, that's one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn. And I think that applies to anything, right? If you speak too much about your product that you're developing, could be anything, could be SaaS, could be, fintech, whatever. And if your investors are just bored with what you're saying and they cannot follow you, you're just going to lose them. And so it's all about sales as well, right? How can you engage? It's about captivating your audience. It's storytelling. And I always say it's you're just telling a story. And if you can tell a story that a 5-year-old can understand, then you're doing well.
Clarissa, I think that's an incredibly valuable lesson for founders from any domain and any discipline. I think for researchers in particular, the focus on all of the business side of the commercialization is equally as important. And it's something that I think often researchers are scared to look into because they're so focused on their science. But the reality is, most researchers, by the fact that they are deep thinkers and thoughtful and astute, have the capacity to easily understand the components of each functional area of the business and to quite frankly master it. So I'm excited to see more researchers applying their knowledge and their intellectual capacity to business, because I
Yes.
think more research-led early stage companies can actually really scale well. And it's just about getting those researchers, giving them the confidence that they can be equally as capable in the business aspects as they can be in their domain or area of expertise.
Yes, exactly.
You're a founder, you're a mum, you're a partner. You've got a lot going on in your life. How do you sustain your energy? How do you sustain your mindset? How do you sustain your relationships while you're building, a globally, hopefully successful company?
I think think it's really important to have what your priorities are. I think you need to know what your why is, right? Like, I love following Simon Sinek because a lot of what he does is what's your why? And if your why is about, trying to change, for me, in my case, trying to transform mental health care, the mission is really important. And your family, at the end of the day, have to be behind that, supporting you, right? But at the same time, you've got to very intentionally create these blocks of time where, you switch off your devices, you don't check your emails, put your phone away, put it in a separate room if you're tempted to look at it. Very intentional things that you have to do because it's not easy, I can tell you that. Like when you're a founder and you're thinking about your business 24/7, it is the hardest thing for me to do to switch off. I simply cannot do it. But sometimes I feel like if I don't intentionally carve out these times and just put my phone away, not check my emails. I give you an example. I've got a 2-year-old at home as well, right? And she's already learned that to get my attention, she has to swat the phone out of my hands. So, when she does that, I'm like, okay, this is definitely not good if my toddler is trying to swat the phone out of my hand. Or she would just like put her palm on top of my phone So you kind of like have to carve out these moments. And so for me, because I have my own schedule and I can, make meetings at the times that I need, I avoid having any meetings after school hours till dinner time, for example. That's when I give focus to my family. I avoid doing any business from, say, 9 p.m. to, bedtime because that's my own relaxation time. I need to be able to relax. I try not to do any emails, even though I think it's easy. I give myself the permission to relax and not feel guilty about it, right? So I play games, or I just color or I paint, things like that, just to help me switch off. But it's really important to be able to do that. And weekends as well. It's like if I'm going out with the family, I try to leave my phone at home so that I'm not tempted to look at it. So I think it's really important to carve out these times for yourself, even if it's not for your family, at least for yourself, right? Because mental exhaustion and burnout, founder burnout is a very real thing. It's one of those things that a lot of people know about. And if you don't take care of yourself, it affects the business ultimately. So that's what I tell myself.
So many valuable lessons there for founders at all stages of the business. And when you've got kids, you've got family responsibilities, giving yourself permission to put the phone in another room is a simple but effective strategy. Leave your phone at home on the weekend. Wow. I think that is also a good lesson. I probably should do some more of that myself, just quietly. So let's talk about Ketim. What stage are you at right now? What does the next 6 to 12 months look like for the business?
Yeah, so we are actually at the stage of, preparing for our next fundraising round. So we're currently at the seed stage. So we had a pre-seed round that we closed, last year, and that was really a round that had angel investors come on, and we had this pocket of, I guess this funding to help us go to the next stage, which is really developing the prototype and trying to understand what is the actual test going to look like? How are we actually formulating this test? What is the evidence that we need? And the next round is really about then making this prototype, bringing it to I guess, beta users or test users, having it in a few clinics and test clinicians. So we're at the stage for the next round where we're really interested in clinical trials. So we're already reaching out to hospitals and potential clinicians who are willing to try it as part of the clinical trial. We're reaching out to consumers. We're reaching out to advocacy groups saying that if we can have market sort of research from consumers on how to develop this prototype. Because again, we don't want to develop something that nobody wants and nobody needs, right? And nobody's going to pay for it. So it's really important for us now to figure out what are those, I guess, points that we need to build on. And then the next stage is building on those points. So we're very excited to be hopefully opening our next round in June, July of this year. And then we're really looking to scale up and put that product into the hands of consumers and clinicians and test out the efficacy and the validity of the test.
Do you have a set of regulatory requirements that you've got to comply with? Is your product physical machine that tests the blood sample? What is your actual product, and how will you go about doing meeting the obligations of regulatory requirements to get to market?
So this is a really interesting question because When we think about what I'm doing, it's essentially considered a complex biotech, right? We've got a blood test that essentially is, whatever format that test would be in. And then you've got the device or the machine that can essentially read that blood test. And then you've also got the algorithms or like the software component of it. So for us, it's like hardware and then a test and then software. But in order for us to, I guess, reduce the amount of regulatory that we need on that, we've actually partnered with a US manufacturer who already have developed the device or the machine. It's already got CE or European mark. So we just have to be able to show that
Fantastic.
our blood test can be done on this machine. And when it can, we'll get CE mark approval as well. We can launch in Europe, then we can get TGA, and then hopefully, go on to do the US. So that was one thing that I developed very early on in the company. Who can we partner with? Because if we're trying to go for creating a new device and then the test and then the software, we'll need like a lot of capital upfront, and we just don't have that, right? So how can you be creative at the beginning and form these partnerships early on? And so for us, we've got the partnership already with the machine. We just need to make the reagents or the components that actually get added to the test, and then validate that in clinical trials, have the software, pick up these markers and have it as part of one bundled sort of unit. So we've checked with our regulatory authorities, and having it bundled together is just one class. It's just the whole thing is the in vitro diagnostic. So we're very happy we didn't have to separate them out and have individual regulatory approval for each of the things first, because that would take forever.
So if you're an investor thinking about investing in medtech like this, what are some of the things that investors are probably looking for to think about what stage they should invest in?
So it's really important, I think, and we get this a lot, is that the IP around your technology is one thing. So making sure that you have a freedom to operate, I guess, and having the technology that is going to give you that edge, right, that competitive edge. But it's also the regulatory framework. So it's not necessary, I suppose, or it's not really possible that at this stage of the company, pre-seed, seed, to already have regulatory paperwork filed and submitted, right? You just can't. It's just impossible. So in that first sort of 2 to 3 years while you develop the technology, it is pre-revenue. So I'm very upfront with the investors that it is pre-revenue because we have to develop the prototype first before you can get regulatory approvals. But once you get regulatory approvals, it skyrockets. Like the valuation of the company just skyrockets. I think that's when a lot of investors then come in because they know it's de-risked. They know it's if regulators are happy with it, that means it's most likely going to be a product to market. So for us, it's really critical to get to that point. Once we get to that point of being able to file and submit, I think that's where we'll have no issues, I guess, really getting the amount of capital we need. But before that, it's really about the belief in the product and the science, right? So how valid is your technology and science? Is it actually going to pass regulatory approval? And this is where I go back to having an idea is not enough. If you have an idea, but it's something that isn't going to pass regulatory approvals, it's almost like you might as well just stop there, because if you can't get regulatory approvals, you're not going to get investors interested if you're going to be in that domain, right? You can always go for the wellness space if that's what you want. You don't have to do any regulatory. I guess you don't have any need to do regulatory. But the wellness industry is very, very, diluted now. So it's very competitive. You can if you want to, but that wasn't our interest, and that's not where we're trying to go. We want to change lives, we want to impact lives, and we want to change clinical practice. And in order to do that, we have to go through the regulations that we need to.
It seems like your path to market makes a lot of sense. If you're basically plugging into an existing business process that happens where, a mother to be comes in and gets a test, you're just part of the blood draw for that test. You then run the blood through a specific machine and identify the specific biomarkers. And then you put that into a cloud and make that assessment available to the doctor. There really is no additional friction other than really the doctor or the payer paying for the test and then accessing the data at the back end, right? And I think back to my earlier comment, I don't think I would know any mum to be that, or any partner of a mum to be that wouldn't want to know in advance if they or their partner was at risk of postpartum depression. So it seems to me like it's a really sensible problem to solve. It's a really important problem to solve, and the way you're going about it makes a lot of sense. How do people get involved in this journey with you?
People actually, the interesting thing is that a lot of people get in touch with me through LinkedIn. So, LinkedIn has been a very good platform for me. I think I've found not only professionals that have provided services to me today that I still use very, very well today, but a lot of consumers themselves, they come to me and say, I'm working in this and job. But what you've posted have made me feel like I could come to you and talk to you about my own experience. And these are like lawyers and top doctors and executives. You're not talking about, I guess, your everyday people, right? These are people that, the stigma would be the highest, right? Especially if you're in the medical field yourself. If you admit that you're going through some sort of mental episode, there's a high risk that you get your medical license taken away from you. So we actually see the highest risk of depression and suicide in health professionals. So, they come to me and say, I wish, this is a way that we could do this. And if it's part of, say, a routine clinical care, and they can just do it as part of that routine care, it doesn't feel like they have to risk losing their license or whatever the case is. So LinkedIn is the best way that people have found me, but I'm pretty active everywhere. So usually people come up to me and just talk to me in person when they see me in public, which is fine. I'm quite happy to do that as well. And I'm around everywhere. So I try to be in as many places as possible. And people are always free to reach out to me whenever they want.
So in the next 12 months, you're going to run trials, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So we're starting trials probably. We've got ethics approval now to start recruiting moms at the Mother Hospital in Brisbane. So we are already looking at potentially putting out the flyers, I suppose, in the hospitals in June, sort of like mid-year, and then we'll start recruiting the moms. We've also got clinical trials being set up internationally as well. So we're trying to recruit from the APAC region as well. So like from Malaysia, Singapore, India, and then we're also looking at the US as well. So trying to make it as ethnically diverse and as geographically diverse as much as possible.
Yeah. So if there are clinicians or practices out there that are specifically focused in this area and have a group of mums to be that would be good candidates for a trial in this area, they should reach out to you on LinkedIn. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. And you can also reach out to me by my email or by our website as well, ketim.com.au. We have a EOI there for clinicians who are interested in perhaps participating in this. At the moment we will offer the test for free, for clinicians, because we want them to be able, not for them to be able to give us the evidence of whether it works or not. And then at the same time, it's really about if any mom is included, we don't exclude anybody. So anybody who's interested in this can do it. You don't have to be, a certain demographic or anything like that. We just include everyone because we want to make sure that at the end of the day, we want this test to be accessible to everyone. We don't want it to only be to very specific groups of people, right? And yeah, so for us, it's just as many moms as we can get. We're happy to get as many as we can get.
Clarissa, that's awesome. I will make sure that your contact details and Ketim's contact details are in the show notes so that anyone can reach out to you. We have gone through 7 questions and you've helped the audience to get an understanding of your business, the problem you're solving, some of the experiences you've had along your founder journey that have helped you to be the founder you are today, better understand the technology and where it's at and what's coming next. So before we wrap up, 7 quickfire questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
Great. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Morning or night?
Morning.
Beaches or mountains?
Mountains.
Books or podcasts?
Podcast.
Do you have a favorite podcast or anything you're listening to at the moment?
Yes. Biotech 2050. It's a US podcast. It's meant to be quite, general audience can listen to it, but they talk about the future of biotech. And it's really cool to listen to some of these pioneers that are really driving the innovation we see today. And quite frankly, a lot of the ideas that I get is from that podcast.
Fantastic. I hope you're on that podcast yourself sometime soon. So, office or home, where do you prefer to work?
home.
Excellent. Are you into gym or cardio?
I prefer, yeah, I like weights, so I would say gym much than to cardio.
I'm sure you get enough cardio chasing the kids around, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And last question. Who's one founder or investor you would love to hear from on 7 Questions?
I really like Ellie Stokes from Beyond the Clinic. She's
Yep.
excellent. We've had a lot of honest discussions around female founders and, about female, I guess being a female and being a dominating CEO and how we handle it with kids and everything. And she's fantastic. She just tells it as it is. She's blunt as ever, and I love it. She just doesn't shy away from telling you what you need to hear.
We need more female founders in every domain, every discipline in the ecosystem in Queensland and also in Australia. And it's great to have women like you and Ali, and there's a whole bunch of others that are really demonstrating that anyone with the passion and the capacity to be a good entrepreneur can build a sustainable business. So I've got Ali coming on the podcast really soon, so I'm looking forward to having her on there. So it's great to know you're going to be a listener to that one. Clarissa, thanks so much for being on 7 Questions. I'm super excited to see where you guys go. I love the problem you're solving. It fits really nicely with my personal investment thesis, which is to invest in things that help to create a sustainable and vibrant future. So I hope to have that conversation with you at some stage as well. We'll continue that conversation. Yeah, I hope people will reach out, because I think what Clarissa is building is a great problem she's solving, but also the way you're solving it is really smart and demonstrates that, once you get the clinical trials and approvals in place, it's likely that this thing will scale. So hopefully you're a rocket ship. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us on 7 Questions.
Thank you so much for having me, Wayne.
Thanks for listening to this episode of 7 Questions. If you'd like to learn more about the founders, you can get a link to the full show notes in the description below. Have a great day. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode.